privilege of coming to you to bring our cares, our concerns, and yes, even God, our thanksgiving and our praise. We ask now, God, that you would bless these next few moments. May something be said or done that will lift you, glorify you, but also, God, to help your people. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Again, my brothers and sisters, this is Zion Hill Baptist Church at 6175 Campbellton Road in Atlanta, Georgia. We are so very happy to come and share with you on this evening. We have been dealing with a series of lessons, actually from the beginning of the year, entitled Seasonal Change. And tonight's lesson comes from the 57th Psalm. We're just going to deal with one verse, and the lesson is entitled The Stormy Season, The Stormy Season. The text reads, "Be merciful to me, O God, be merciful to me, for in you my soul takes refuge. In the shadow of your wings I will take refuge until the destroying storms pass by." As we introduce this lesson, one of the most enduring metaphors for severe struggles in this life is the storm. This is probably the case, brothers and sisters, because storms pack so much violent, often destructive, and usually uncontrollable power. Given storms' comparatively immense magnitude and size, they tend to overwhelm and thus inspire in human beings a deep sense of awe. Let me talk about awe for just a moment. Awe is a kind of combination of two human feelings. On the one hand, awe includes the feeling of fear. There is some sense in which there is dread, there is anguish. But on the other hand, there is also the sense of respect, of the recognition of the power. So sometimes when we go through storms, there's certainly regular storms, the literal storms do create in us a sense of awe. When we hear the loud clapping of the thunder or the sharp flashing of the lightning, when we hear the wind whirling, when we see snow falling in abundance, that actually creates in us this sense of amazement, this sense of wonder, this sense of awe. Storms move people out of their comfort zones by requiring that they operate outside of their norms. When there's a serious storm, brothers and sisters, make no mistake about it, you cannot operate as you normally operate. We have to do something different. We have to move to a different place. We have to refrain from doing some things, and then we have to get started doing some other things whenever there is a serious storm. Literally, when we think of storms, we have in mind thunderstorms, hailstorms, ice storms, tropical storms, tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, and blizzards. Storms result from changes in atmospheric conditions, and usually, the more radical those changes, the more intense the storms. Life's most severe struggles are often called storms. We're talking about the unanticipated loss of major personal or household income, a bitter, hotly contested custody battle in a divorce, a serious, life-threatening health problem, and the sudden, unexpected loss of a loved one. For this nation, some of the most catastrophic storms. All of us, of course, remember 9/11/2001, when New York's World Trade Center towers were struck by two airplanes. We remember from history, and there may even be a few people still around who remember the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor, There was, of course, the 1929 stock market crash and the subsequent economic depression, where there was at least 25% unemployment here at the country. There was this brutal transportation, I'm talking about the Middle Passage, chattel enslavement, and continued oppression of millions of Africans in this country. Surely that was the time of a storm. And certainly, brothers and sisters, we will be able to add to this list this ravaging disease called COVID-19, our current storm. For this indeed is a time, brothers and sisters, where we cannot act normally, where we have to move outside of our comfort zones. And this is what we are under at this moment. Each of us has known storms that leave us fearful, bewildered, stifled, and unsettled. Storms make our foundation shake, our dreams shatter, our hopes wane, and our hearts break. So the prayer that this particular psalmist, this 57th psalmist, offers in our selected Bible verse ought to speak very clearly to us today, for he too experiences or has experienced a storm. He has gone through a very tough season in his life. And we shall examine only his opening statement, and that is verse 1. Verse 1 begins with the words, brothers and sisters, "Be merciful to me, O God, be merciful to me." Now, when we think of this call for mercy, it literally means a superior stooping down to an inferior in order to help that inferior up. The call for mercy is to call for somebody to come to me because I cannot get to them. The call for mercy says there's something that I don't have that I need from someone else, and I recognize that someone else who can provide me what I need. It means to show favor, to bestow, or to have pity upon. The biblical scholar William R. Taylor asserts that this particular psalmist, this 57th psalmist, appeals to God's favor, a free, uncovenanted, and unmerited act of divine goodness and compassion. That is to say, this author is saying, look, God, I understand that I may not even deserve what I'm asking for. But because I have such a great need, I'm asking for it anyway. In this sense, brothers and sisters, it's this idea of a call for mercy is very much connected to the idea of grace, which we have traditionally defined as the unmerited favor of God upon a human being. So this call for mercy is, in a sense, a call for grace. God, I'm not saying that I deserve what I'm asking for. I'm asking you to have pity upon my situation and come to my aid regardless of my situation. In other words, God, my life may not be perfect. I may not have done everything that you have asked me to do. I may not have said everything I should have said. I may not have done everything I should have done. But God, in this moment, in this hour, because it is so pressing, because it is so disturbing, because, God, it may even destroy me, I'm asking that you come to my rescue. God, save me. That's what this call for mercy is about. The psalmist here obviously felt that he had no means by which to get to God, so he prayed that God would come to him. Ultimately, brothers and sisters, this may be our condition with respect to the Most High God. We cannot get to God, not in the absolute sense. Therefore, we must beseech God. We must ask God. We must request that God come to us. In other words, our reach goes just so far. Our ability to understand is just so deep. We only have strength to lift just so much. We can only travel just so far. There's a sense in which we are in our human condition utterly limited. And so there are those times, there are those situations, and maybe we're in one right now, where we cannot reach all the way up to God to say, all right, God, I'm going to come to where you are. But instead, because of our limitations, we have to say, God, this is as far as I can go. God, come and see about me. There have been a number of other biblical calls to mercy, and I just want to go through a few of these now, brothers and sisters. These next few calls for mercy come from the Psalms. In Psalm 51:1, we have mercy upon me, O God, according to thy loving kindness, according to the multitude of thy tender mercies, blot out my transgressions. This particular psalm is called a Psalm of David. Although David may not have literally written the psalm was written with a situation in David's life in mind. The situation, of course, was the time when David actually took another man's wife, had that man killed, and did not even recognize that he had done wrong. And so the prophet Nathan came to David and told David a little story about a man who only had one little lamb and another man who had many livestock. Well, the man who had many livestock had a visitor to come by his house. And when the visitor came, instead of the man killing one of his livestock to help feed the visitor, he went and took the poor man's one little sheep and he killed it. David, who was king over Israel at the time, became utterly irate. And he said to Nathan, Nathan, who did this? And Nathan said, you are the man. It was in this context that David lifted up the mood that this psalm carries. Have mercy upon me, O God, according to thy loving kindness, according to the multitude of thy tender mercies, blot out my transgressions. Several other psalms that talk about have mercy. Have mercy upon me and hear my prayer. That's Psalm 4:1. Psalm 6:2 says, have mercy upon me, O Lord, for I am weak. Psalm 9:13 says, have mercy upon me, O Lord, consider my trouble which I suffer. Then in Psalm 27:7, have mercy upon me, O Lord, and answer me. That one essentially talks about feeling as though God is not answering. There are times in our lives, brothers and sisters, especially those people of faith, when you're calling upon God and you're calling upon God and you're asking God to come and do this for you and come and do that for you. And sometimes it seems like God does not hear. I know that's a strange thing to say because usually people say, well, God always hears it. But there are times when it seems like God is not hearing. What are those times? Those times when you have prayed over a difficulty to be removed and the difficulty lingers. Those times when you have struggled to climb out of a rut in your life, and every time you climb up, someone puts some oil on where you're climbing and you slip back down to the bottom. I'm talking about those times where you have prayed that someone who opposes you would just simply leave you alone, and the person keeps coming back over and over, time after time. Sometimes it seems like God does not hear you. So this psalmist, this 27th psalmist says, have mercy upon me, O Lord, and answer me. Then there's 31:9 that says, have mercy upon me, O Lord, for I am in trouble. Psalm 41:10 says, thou, O Lord, be merciful unto me and raise me up. There's some other biblical calls for mercy that we want to lift up from the Gospels. There were two blind men who met Jesus one day, and they cried out, saying, thou son of David, have mercy on us. Then there was this Canaanite woman whose daughter was severely possessed, She came up to Jesus and she said, "Have mercy upon me, O Lord, thou son of David. My daughter is grievously vexed with a devil." This is a particularly interesting story, and is one that contains an extraordinary amount of drama. For in that story, brothers and sisters, Jesus had gone to the region of Tyre and Sidon, what was also sometimes known as Phoenicia. It was an area of the Gentiles, and Jesus, having gone there, came across this woman, this Canaanite woman, who came up to Jesus and said, "Look, Jesus, my daughter is at home possessed, and I just need you to say something in order to help my daughter." Jesus initially did not say anything, and so the woman kept shouting. Then the disciples who were following Jesus decided to get into the act, and they said, "Jesus, why don't you tell this woman to go away and leave us alone, because she keeps shouting after us." The woman kept on asking Jesus for help for her daughter. And even Jesus said something peculiar to the woman. Jesus said, "You know what? I didn't come for other people. And it's not good to give the children's bread to the dogs." Now, I don't know what you make of that, but on the surface, it didn't seem like a really good thing to say to this woman. Some biblical scholars say that Jesus was merely testing the woman's faith. But in any event, the woman came back to Jesus and she said, "Look, but even the dogs get the crumbs from the children's table." What she was asking for was some mercy in the form of just a word from Jesus. That was the mercy that she received, because she understood that she could not do anything about her own daughter. Then in Matthew 17:15, we find the words, "A man with an epileptic son who suffered terribly pleaded with Jesus, saying, 'Lord, have mercy on my son.'" When Jesus had been on top of what is called the Mountain of Transfiguration. There he took with him Peter, James, and John, and Jesus' countenance changed, and Peter said it was good for us to be here. Then after that, Peter, James, and John, along with Jesus, come down from the mountain, and when they get to the valley, they see that the other 9 disciples are there arguing with some other people. And Jesus wanted to know what was all the argument about. And this man steps up and says, "You know what? Jesus, I brought my son who is suffering terribly to your disciples, and they could not heal him." Jesus looked at the disciples and said, "Wow, how long am I going to have to be with you? You of little faith." And then Jesus asked the man, "Look, do you believe that I can do this?" The man said, "Yes, Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief." Jesus ended up healing the boy. But the point of the story that we want to lift up here in this context is the man had actually gone to Jesus' disciples, and he felt utterly helpless. So he asked Jesus for mercy. Not that he necessarily deserved it, or even that his son deserved it, but let me have some mercy. Then there were 10 lepers who approached Jesus, and they said to Jesus, "Master, have mercy on us." Then Jesus told a story about 2 men who went up to the temple to pray one day. That would be the temple in Jerusalem. The 2 men, one was a fairly rich man, wealthy man, a man who had been going to the temple on a regular basis. And he stood up, he raised his eyes toward heaven, and he said, "Lord, I thank you that I'm not like other people. I fast, I give my tithes. God, I thank you that I'm not even like this sinner who's over here." Then the other man said, after keeping his head down, he simply said, "Lord, have mercy upon me, a sinner." And it was this man who left from the temple justified and blessed by God. Why? Because he understood that he needed mercy. whereas the other man did not. Here's what a sincere call for mercy entails. It entails an acknowledgement of insufficiency, whether that insufficiency is temporary or permanent. An acknowledgement of that insufficiency in the face of difficulty. I know most of us have been listening to what is going on with this current world crisis that we're in. I know you almost can't get away from it. It seems to be everywhere. It's ubiquitous. And sometimes you'll have a sense that there's nothing that can be done. You want to believe that we're going to come out of it soon, but most of what you hear from the experts right now is that it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. You've even heard predictions of numbers of people who may succumb to the virus. And so you wonder sometimes, when or how will it all end? How will we get through this? And for people of faith, you're saying to God, look, I don't have any answers. I know there are people running around saying that you need to do this and you need to do that, and we do need to practice as diligently as we possibly can what those who have said to us and those who know something about them, we need to practice that as much as we can. But sometimes you still feel that sense of helplessness where you can't make it, where there's really no protection. I'm saying to you, my brothers and sisters, that is exactly the first step in actually becoming an extraordinarily faithful person. That's the first step in moving toward finding some assurance in God. It is to admit that there are some things that I cannot do and cannot deal with and cannot change. It doesn't mean that you go out and live recklessly and do everything that you want to do. That's not what that means. It means that you resign yourself to understanding that ultimately God is going to have to get us through this. God is going to have to get us on the other side of this. I'm going to do my part, what I can do, but after that, I'm going to leave the rest up to God. So the first thing you need to do in a call for mercy is to realize that there is some insufficiency. Secondly, a sincere call for mercy is an expression of faith. For it says that despite the present dire circumstances, I still believe that somehow we're going to get out of this. Brothers and sisters, that is a crucial message, a crucial idea. And it is so very important as we go through some of those trying times certainly in most of our personal histories. We've never had to live like this, most of us. We've never had to operate in this way. We've never had to move so much out of our regular way of operating as we are doing now. This is a different kind of season, a different kind of difficulty. And it is of utmost importance that we maintain a faith, a firm belief, a confidence that somehow we are going to get through this and somehow come out as a conqueror. A part of what it means to ask for mercy is to express this faith. You're saying, I still believe that there is some way that I'm going to get out of this. Because the person who thinks that, the person who gives in to despair does not even ask for mercy because they don't even think that anything can be done. So they don't feel the need to even ask for it. So when somebody asks for mercy and asks for mercy in earnest, they're saying, look, I believe that somehow, some way, somewhere, this catastrophe, this calamity, this adversity will indeed pass. Now, when we look at the rest of this first verse in this 57th Psalm, it reads this way once again: "For in you, that is, in God, my soul takes refuge. In the shadow of your, that is, God's wings, I will take refuge until the destroying storms pass by." I want to talk a little bit about the shadow of God's wings, first of all, the shadow of God's wings. And let me give you a little bit of background. God's wings here in this particular text, brothers and sisters, may be an adaptation of the more ancient Egyptian sun god Ra, sometimes also spelled Re, and sometimes it even has a suffix onto it. This god was sometimes portrayed as a falcon, that is the bird, the falcon. And here's just a picture of that, of the representation of that god as the ancient falcon. The ancient Egyptians believed this, that the falcon, or the golden hawk, sometimes he's understood as, used to fly across the sky by day and then go underneath the earth, fight with the god of the underworld, Apophis, and then after defeating Apophis, come up on the other side, that is the eastern side, and start to rule the day all over again. This is what this ancient god was understood to be. And so this notion and idea of being under God's wing, if we look at the Egyptian influence, suggests that someone is following or under the protection of this God that defeats darkness every day. Understand how important that is. This means that no matter what comes to you every day, no matter what you have to deal with, every day, if you are under this wing, you come out protected. You come out victorious. Yes, you have to go through the time of darkness. Kind of sounds like another Bible verse that we often hear people quote, Psalm 30 and 5. God's anger is but for a moment, but God's favor is for a lifetime. Weeping may endure for the night, but joy comes in the morning. This idea of this God going down underneath and fighting with the underworld and then coming out victorious the next day. God, we may be going through the underworld right now, but morning time will come. That's this God, Ra. Another thing about this God, Ra, is that Ra was also understood as the creator God. That is the God that brings into being. This is of utmost importance as well, my brothers and sisters, just as an image, because sometimes life presents us with nothing, or life threatens to take everything away. And it's good to be under the protection of the God who creates. This is the God who creates. Now, God's wings may also have been derived from the wings of the cherubim. These are the winged creatures that's talked about in the book of Zechariah and also in the book of Daniel of the ancient Hebrew religion. It is a form of the cherubim were actually erected on the famed Ark of the Covenant that, according to the book of Exodus, Moses was directed to construct. Let me give you just, that's a replica of the Ark of the Covenant, a replica. And you will see the two creatures that are poised or posted on top of the ark. What they have stretched out there, brothers and sisters, are their wings. And their wings were understood to be wings of protection. Hence, the Ark of the Covenant actually served as a symbol of God's protection for the Israelites as they were traveling in the wilderness on their way to becoming a nation. And even after they started to settle into the land of Canaan, the Ark of the Covenant was seen as that symbol of God's presence with them. And so to be under the Ark of the Covenant was to be under God's wings. Or, there's one other way in which we can understand these wings. God's wings may have been simply taken from the natural world of a mother bird protecting her young. And here's a picture of a swan who's gathering up her young chicks underneath her wing for protection. These are the ideas that this particular author is trying to convey. Here, God's wings indicate divine protection, comfort, assurance, that in spite of the troubled environment, we can feel safe. Now, let me pause here for just a moment. One of the hardest things to do is to feel safe when danger is all around, is to have some sense of comfort when everything around you seems to be falling apart. I know that there are brothers and sisters, some of whom may be listening right now or looking at this particular broadcast. You're worried, you're anxious, you're all out of sorts, you're wondering what the next day is going to bring. Some of you are wondering, do I have enough supplies in my house? Have I been exposed to someone who is infected with the coronavirus? Will my family be protected? I cannot get to some members of my family. I want to see them, but I know that seeing them might be a dangerous thing both for them and for me. So there is this sense of lostness, this sense of worry, this anxious spirit. Well, I want to impress upon you that the whole notion and idea of being under God's wings is to provide you with some comfort even while danger is present. The 23rd psalmist said, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, because you, God, are with me. That's one of the most often quoted passages in the Bible, but I want you to understand something of the depth of that passage. It says, even though I'm in trouble, even though death is all around me, God, I'm going to be calm. Why? Because you are with me. And maybe that's the prayer that a lot of us need to pray right now in this season. We need to pray even while trouble is all around us. Even as we go through all of these extra efforts to be careful, that anxiety and worry and stress and even despair will not come in and take over our lives and cause us to utterly panic. Calm down, brothers and sisters. You've got some wings to live under. God's wings will keep you no matter what the situation. Be calm. Be quiet. Reside under God's wings. I don't know whether any of us remember it or not, but I remember it quite well. When I was a child, there was nothing like getting underneath your mama's arms, or whoever that person was who served as your mother. Because when you were under your mother's arms, no matter what else was going on in your life, you felt all right. Yes, you might have to get up in a little while and deal with some other issues, but while you were under your mother's arms, you felt that protection, you felt that safety, you felt that comfort. Well, I'm just trying to tell you that God is like that mother. But God can provide you that kind of comfort and assurance if you will just allow God to do it. Snuggle up with God tonight. After you look at the news and you find out what's going on, snuggle up with God tonight and let God put God's arms around you, shelter you, comfort you, quiet your spirit. No one speaks of this godly refuge more eloquently than the poet of Psalm 18. He says, "The Lord is my rock, my fortress, my deliverer, my God, my rock in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold." Equally as eloquent, we find in Psalm 91, "He that dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress. My God, in Him will I trust." We should also consider Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. I love that. God is a present help in trouble. There are times when we're going to be in trouble. And the question always comes, well, why, if you believe in God so much, why is it that we're in trouble? I'll tell you what I tell members of Zion Hill all the time. I don't know. I know a lot of people say, well, whoa, you don't know? No, I don't know. And anyone who tells you that they know and have an answer to every trouble that we go through in this world, they're not, I don't think that they're reading the Bible correctly. Job did not know why he went through what he went through. And if you read the book of Job very carefully, he never gets an answer as to why he went through what he went through. God just simply tells him, essentially at the end, "I'm God." And Job says, "All right, you're God. I got to trust you anyway. Even though I don't have an explanation as to why I'm going." I know we've asked this question over and over. Why are we going through this? Why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to the world? Brothers and sisters, that may not be the critical question. The critical question may be, do we experience the presence of God as we go through the trouble? There is no question that we are going to go through trouble as human beings. That is a given fact of life. The question is how do we go through? Do we go through afraid, unnerved, torn asunder emotionally? Do we suffer from spiritual anemia where we lose ourselves in the midst of trial and tragedy? Or do we exude a sense of faith even while we are going through? Brothers and sisters, you see, the victory may not always be in getting out of the trouble. The victory may be in dealing with the trouble while you're in it. Right. God is a refuge. God offers protection when times are at their worst. Just as one needs special clothing or shelter in a natural storm, you got to take cover in a natural storm. You can't wear the same thing that you wear in July in a January snowstorm. You have to put on something else. And just as Just as you need special clothing and shelter in a natural storm, we need special clothing and shelter in a spiritual storm. What we are going through right now as a human race, we need something extraordinary in order to make it through. We're just not accustomed to doing what we're doing, brothers and sisters, social distancing. We're not accustomed to doing this for these extended periods of time. And we're certainly not accustomed to doing it this pervasively. That is to say, virtually all over the world. We're in a different season, a different time. This is not normal. And the question is what do we have that will enable us to get through it? How are we going to keep moving? How are we going to keep our sense about ourselves? How are we going to remain sane and remain stable through all of this turmoil that is going on around us? Brothers and sisters, I would submit, and I offer to you, developing that kind of relationship with God where you can reside under the shadow of God's wing. There's one other thought I want to lift up with respect to this lesson. I think it'll be very important for us to grasp here. And that is, God is our refuge until the destroying storms pass by. Now, I don't want you to overlook this prepositional phrase, until the destroying storms pass by. When you hear the word until, notice that it does not say if the destroying storms pass by. There is in the word until a kind of anticipation that the storm has an expiration date. For example, you say, I'm only going to be here until I get through. You are anticipating finishing whatever it is you have started doing because you say until. This particular author says until the destroying storms pass by, anticipating that at some point the storm, as they used to say, is passing over. I know the storm is raging right now. Look, we're in the very heart of the storm right now. Right now, we're in the very heart of it, and I know. And the storm may even get a little worse before it gets better. But brothers and sisters, what we do need to understand about this, and I hope that all of us see this, notice that this whole situation that we are in as a world, that this storm has been moving. It's been moving the entire time. It moved from China to Europe, to the United States, and now it's going to other parts of the world. I want you to notice that this storm is moving, and because the storm is moving, you always know that it has an expiration date. This storm will end. When? We hardly ever know when storms are going to end. Not these types of storms. But the idea is that the storm will end. He said, I'm going to remain under the protection of God until this storm passes. All right. This means, brothers and sisters, up to the time that the destroying storm passes by, or to the point when the destroying storm passes by. And all I want you to do is this, brothers and sisters, and this is our final statement here. Stay under God's wings. When you start to get a little uneasy, and I know, listening to reports, Hearing what's going on will make you feel a little uneasy at times. When you start to feel a little uneasy, find you a quiet place, a very, very quiet place. And when you find yourself that quiet place, be honest with yourself and with God. If you're scared, tell God, God, I am scared out of my wits. If you're nervous, just tell God, God, my nerves have been frayed and they are almost about to snap. You're worried. God, I'm so worried I don't know what to do. I'm worried about myself. I'm worried about my relatives who are not around. Some of you who are even listening to me right now, you have relatives in the hospital. Some of you have already lost relatives and you're feeling broken and down and distraught. That is precisely the time that you need to go and get into the shadow of God's wings. The shadow of God, the shadow of God's wings. Listen at what is being said there. The image is that if you're out alone, dealing with these catastrophes by yourself, they beam down upon you like the scorching heat of a midsummer sun. The idea is that you need some covering. You need some shade. The idea is that you need to move from out of the midst of the heat that will still be present and get underneath a shadow. You see, a shadow is a darker place, a covered place. You know that you're next to something that's bigger than you when you get into the shadow of something. So move into the shadow of God. Go to that quiet place. Go to that quiet place. Move into the shadow of God's wings and tell God, here I am. I'm worried. I'm afraid. I'm concerned. God, I'm distraught. I'm running around with a nervous tick. God, I don't know what to do. I can't sleep at night. I'm waking up. When I do finally fall asleep, I'm waking up worried, and I get worried all over again. God, I need some peace. God, give me a moment of quiet where I can just rest. Go to God tonight. Get underneath God's wing and let God shelter and shower you with love, with comfort, with calm, with repose. May God bless you and may God keep you. Let us pray. Again, God, we thank you for this moment and for this time. We seek God now only to reside under the shadow of your wings. Comfort us. Calm us. Give us that inner assurance that lets us know that yes, in the midst of this crisis, we will still be all right. God, give us that. That's all we ask tonight, is for that moment of repose and peace and assurance that we believe you can most definitely provide. This is our prayer, God. Humbly we submit it. Amen.